thank you, Kim. And it truly has been an honor for me to be affiliated with the Council of State Governments. And I can say that a lot of the things that we've been able to accomplish in Alabama, that at least the small little part that I've been involved in, are much thanks to the Council of State Governments. So I want to thank our wonderful hosts from North Dakota. Many of us, I think this is our first visit, and we are so impressed with North Dakota. Everyone has been so kind and so dear during our travels, which we really appreciate. And before I begin my remarks, I want to tell you that I just want to thank the three men to my right. They have given up, it takes about a day to get here from Alabama and a day to get home, and they have given up a minimum of 3 days to come be with y'all. And that is a testament, I believe, to their commitment to all the three branches of government working together in Alabama. These folks are into solutions. That's why they are excelling at what they do, and I'm very grateful and humbled to be associated with them. Unlike the folks that haven't worn a robe, many of you have not had that wonderful privilege of ruling in various cases that can be interesting and or other challenging. And one of those cases that as a trial judge you just love are divorce cases. And we got some judges in here, and they know what I mean. There was a judge on the bench, and he had a divorce case, but fortunately, no child custody involved. Just a lengthy marriage, lots of assets, various assets. And so there was a day-long trial where he had to listen back and forth about who wanted what, etc. Well, at the end of the day, he was going to be very courageous, which I hope most judges are. And he said, I'm prepared to rule at this time. I fairly and considered and dispassionately considered all the evidence in this case, and I'm now prepared to render my decision. And he looked at the wife and he said, ma'am, I'm going to give you the house, and I'm going to give you the car, and I'm going to give you $1,500 a month. Well, the husband spoke up and said, that's mighty generous of you, Judge, and I'll try to help out too. Well, we find sometimes that our communication skills are not quite as effective as we would like for them to be. But the reason why I think that that's illustrative of a few concepts is that when I mentioned, Dan, the announcement about how the Conference of Chief Justices, our Chief Justices group, are becoming much more involved in this concept of judges. We need to do our part. Judges need to do our part. I was told later by one of our lawyer members on the executive committee that an older member of the legislature from another state leaned over and said, judges getting involved in policy? I don't think I like that. And so I know that for those of us, well, Judge, that's mighty generous of you, and I'll try to help out too. I think, know that there are ways that we need to be involved in ways that they're not. But at the same time, before we get into the solutions that I think we've been able to put in place here in Alabama, I wanted to share with you just a few other concerns and sort of setting the stage about why I am so committed to the concept of the judiciary being involved. I'm very fortunate because, and I think Governor Folsom is going to mention this, I'm literally working off the shoulders of giants that were able to see and understand the importance of a unified judicial system. And I am able to do things in Alabama as the chief administrative officer of the entire court system that my fellow chief justices in other states that do not have a unified judicial system are not able to do. That doesn't mean they shouldn't be involved, but they're not able to do it. And I think I really ought to have it's either 16 or 17 states that have unified, is it 16 or 17? 16 states that have a unified judicial system, which means that they're in charge, as am I, of everything from limited jurisdiction courts to general jurisdiction courts, everything in between. And when I became Chief Justice, I was elected in 2006 and became Chief Justice in 2007. I made a commitment that for the courts in Alabama that I wanted to bring about, having been a trial judge for 13.5 years, on the Court of Criminal Appeals for 12 years, and truly loving the courts because, people don't come to the court because they want to. They come into the courthouse into the courtroom because they have to. And I want judges to have what they need to be able to better serve our citizens. And so I made the decision as my goal as Chief Justice that I wanted to bring about as much positive change to the court system in Alabama from one end of our state to the other as the system could helpfully withstand. You know, and in order for me to bring about evidence-based practice, courts of accountability, access to justice, drug courts, mental health courts, and the other things that we know will ultimately make the public safer, who do I need? These guys right here. There's not one thing, really, I mean, there's a few things, but so much of the significant changes depend on the gentlemen who are on this panel with me. I can have a good idea, and some of it I can bring about. But when I tell my judges, all my trial court judges in the state, you know, I want a model drug court in every county, I have to have the support of the legislature to give the funding and sometimes the legislative enactments that are necessary to make that happen. So truly, my hands are tied without them, and that's why for the advantages and the positive things that have happened in Alabama, I greatly thank them for that. You know, I feel like we had an oral argument in Supreme Court right before we came up, and it was, gentlemen, y'all know Bob Harris from Morgan County. Bill Cobb calls him Squire Harris. So he was in court arguing a case, and after he got through, after the petitioner eloquently argued his case, Squire Harris, who formerly was in the legislature, got up and he said, "Your Honors, I feel kind of like an old dog full of fleas. My opposing counsel has touched on so many places, I don't know where to scratch." Well, I say that because there are that many areas that really judges, there's so many areas where judges can have an impact, you don't quite know where to scratch. And so let me just quickly mention a few of those. And all of my concerns for the court system in Alabama and all these areas literally came out of my experience as a judge. Sentencing reform, protection of children, expansion of drug courts, juvenile justice reform, domestic violence and family court issues, judicial selection reform, and indigent defense. And when you start thinking about sentencing reform, impact of our prison population, the protection of children in your Department of Youth Services, the treatment of children as far as your Department of Human Resources, all of these are big ticket items for the legislature, big ticket items. And these are areas where judges can have, I think, a positive impact. I wanted to mention to y'all, and we left you just very quickly to say, that the Conference of Chief Justices is becoming very involved. Pew Charitable Trust and the National Center for State Courts have become very involved in realizing that judges need to get out of the courtroom and, where appropriate, offer advice and input on some of these big issues that have such a big impact on public safety, quality of life, and the state budgets. One of the policy statements I just want to share with y'all was a policy statement in support of judicial involvement. And if I just read it at some point, you might want to take it back, show it to your judges. In support of judicial criminal justice mental health leadership initiative, which is just basically saying, here are the reasons why judges ought to be involved in wanting drug courts and wanting mental health courts and sentencing reform. Another is just a policy statement by another set of court leaders, and that's your court administrators. All of you, whether you have a unified judicial system or not, have got a court administrator, a state director of AOC. We call it Administrative Office of Courts in Alabama. And this is just an example of a policy statement where all of our court administrators throughout the United States believe that they should be involved in the protection of children and child welfare issues. So I think that it's clear that there's a move for us to be more involved. Mary mentioned to me, which y'all just had the advantage of hearing Mary McQueen, that the conference that we just had in Pennsylvania, and Kim, I want to apologize because I do believe we would have had more involvement of more Chief Justices, but the Pew Charitable Trust had just had a large, significant conference on this very issue, and that Pew Charitable Trust paid the way for everyone to attend, and we had a huge response. And if any of y'all are interested, those of you that are from other states and want to go back and say, tell me, did my Chief Justice come? I've got it right here. So if you want to know if your Chief Justice or your court administrator came to that conference, please let me know. And I'll be glad to show you, because I think it'd be interesting for y'all, for those of you that want to get judges more involved. When I became involved with Council of State Governments, I got involved with really Dan asked me to become involved with the Interbranch Working Group, which is where I met Kim and Chief Justice Joe Lambert and others. And it did become readily apparent that there are not as, well, let me just say, too few Chief Justices and judges throughout the state that are involved in efforts either locally or on a national level on some of these important issues. And it was there that I received the information, actually, that to help me do my job as Chief Justice of Alabama, that it would help me if I called the heads of the branches of governments in Alabama and asked for us to begin getting together. And I'm very fortunate that our governor, who was unable to be here, you know, the National Governors Conference is this week, that Lieutenant Governor Folsom and Speaker of the House Seth Hammett were willing to do just that, and I think they may comment on it more. But I'm absolutely convinced, and I hope y'all are, that our getting together quarterly to meet, and we made it very clear that these meetings would continue as long as they would remain confidential, and that we would be benefiting from what we shared one with the other. And I'm proud to say I think that they've had a positive role, and it's been a large part to the gentlemen that are beside me. Why do you want to get judges involved? And some of the other folks may comment on this. If you look at polling, and a lot of this has to do with judicial selection, in which Alabama, of course, we have still partisan election of judges, which is definitely not the way to do it. But in other states, judges are truly seen to be above politics, or much further above politics than other elected officials. And they can have the prestige and the other things that are necessary to be able to convene groups and people that can contribute greatly to these policy efforts, just like the gentlemen that are leading the other branches of government. And I do think that one of the things that's different about judges than other folks is they're in those courtrooms seeing society's problems day in and day out. And that's truly the reason why I've become involved in this effort and have done what I've done in Alabama. You know, as I mentioned during my question, judges are the gatekeepers. It's one thing to pass the law, which ever so important, and our job is to interpret what that law is and to enforce it. What you say is what we need to enforce. But once you pass that law, those of us that are legislators and the executive branch who works perhaps with the legislative agenda to get laws passed, our job is then to decide how to enforce it, and many times that involves gatekeeping responsibilities with juvenile detention, reformatory schools, prisons, mental health services, even foster care. If you basically think about the bulk of your services that you spend the most money on, those are the services that it takes a judge to basically refer someone or order someone or commit someone to that bed which you're having to pay for. Commissioner Allen, all of us here, he is our representative from the executive branch. Although we're in different parties, I'll tell you that we do not have a finer public servant in Alabama than Commissioner Richard Allen. He took on, after a prestigious, unbelievably successful legal career with a fine firm, public service in the Attorney General's office, and then the hardest job in Alabama, and that's Commissioner of Prisons. And I hope he will talk about some of the things that we've been able to accomplish working together, because so many of the things that we care about, it is true collaboration between the courts and those that are having the difficult job of trying to supervise and manage Alabama's terribly overcrowded and underfunded prison system. One of the things that I was very pleased that our collaboration helped make possible for me. And I just want to see a show of hands. I know we've got, how many of you have State of the Judiciary addresses where the Chief Justice comes and gives a state? You see that? Isn't that interesting? We had, and that was most of y'all. We have not had a Chief Justice give a State of the Judiciary address. I guess we decided, was it since the late 80s? Was that right, Seth? I think, and I believe it was only 3 times ever in the history of Alabama had a Chief Justice. Well, I didn't even know about State of the Judiciaries because we don't do it in Alabama. And it wasn't until I came to the Conference of Chief Justices, Mary, that I realized that for the courts, for the legislature to better understand our needs and concerns, that we need to do a better job, you know, to bridge that gap. And so I went to Governor Folsom and to Speaker Hammett and said, would y'all allow me the privilege of speaking to a joint session of the legislature? And I was very pleased that, of course, they readily agreed and made that a priority and set that up and scheduled it when they thought we would have the best participation from the legislature. Could not have accommodated me more. And it gave me an opportunity to lay out what my vision is for the courts in Alabama. And my vision is that we be more efficient and we be more accountable. That we be more transparent as well and open to the public, and that we implement evidence-based practice from one end of our state to the other. Another success story, and I hope that all of these gentlemen will mention it also or will comment on it as they see fit, is that I hired a legislative liaison for the courts. We had had one in the past and not had one in the recent years, and I hired someone who could daily be present with the legislature everywhere during the session, and tried to make it better understood what our legislative priorities were. Our court system in Alabama, and I would assume most of you have this, Mary, you might know better than I, we have a legislative council, which are basically the officers of our circuit clerks, our juvenile judges, our circuit judges, our district judges, and municipal judges. And we have a legislative council, and then we will vet legislation and basically come up with what our legislative agenda is, having to do with, for instance, it might be protection from abuse act, you know, that we, for domestic violence, that we, you know, we really support that as a way to help reduce domestic violence or better protect battered women, some issue of that nature. And our legislative council voted that the Juvenile Justice Act, which has now become law of 2008, was our #1 legislative priority outside of our budget, and communicated that to the leaders of Governor Folsom and Speaker Hammett. And I can say that because of the priority they placed on the court's priorities, we passed monumental legislation in Alabama, and I'm very just can't possibly put into words what it's going to mean for children in Alabama. I'm going to stop there and make sure that we have time for these gentlemen to speak. And I just want to thank them again for joining me on this panel in North Dakota.
Thank you, Sue. It's a great privilege for me to be here. This is my first trip to North Dakota. It's like someone said, this land is so long and flat in this part of the state that your dog can run away from the house and you can see him run for 3 days. But it's beautiful country, and we're really having a great time here. Thanks for your hospitality, and it's a beautiful, beautiful state. I was just thinking earlier that really us being here today and Chief Justice Cobb accomplishing what she has accomplished over the last year in Alabama, which is very significant, you know, really is a testament to the Council of State Governments, Dan and Kim, and what it can do by working with leaders in various states. You're seeing a direct result of that, of some very positive developments in our home state because of what the Chief Justice has done there in the last year. She started communicating with me right after the election. We were elected the same year. And I wanted to say, by the way, that the resume, Ken, that was sent up talking about me being elected in '86 and '90 and '93 and all, My staff sent the one they sent out in the state. Everybody knows I'm lieutenant governor down there. I was reelected 2 years ago. But in Alabama, the tradition of the Chief Justice is an important one. We had a fellow named Howell Heflin served as Chief Justice, which I think, Rich, you served on his staff for a number of years. He was the one who unified the court system in Alabama back in the late 70s. A fellow who followed him was an activist, a progressive activist named Bo Torbett, and Bo pretty much had to go about and make sure he was able to get the money up to fund the unified judicial system. And Chief Justice Cobb is of that same, I guess, tradition or heritage. She is passionate about her positions and her issues. She takes her job seriously. She provides great leadership, and she communicates a position. You know, earlier, I thought it was interesting when we were here, and some of the discussions centered around the role of the judiciary in different states versus the role of the legislature, involvement by judges. Some states it's not so kosher. Some feeling that there's a restriction because of the canon of ethics that certain judges have to go by. Some judges want to be judicious, and they don't feel, I'd say, very comfortable becoming activist or lobbying through the legislative process. But, you know, in our state, as Chief Justice Cobb said, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is the chief administrative officer of the courts throughout the state. So if there's a need in the court system, there's an issue that arises, or issues that arise, or things that need to be reformed, really, if the Chief Justice doesn't communicate those issues, and we in the legislature don't know of them, or don't understand the gravity of them, then generally those issues aren't taken seriously. Sue Bell came to the legislature, addressed the legislature, outlined the issues that were important to the courts, and the legislature responded. She didn't aggressively lobby as most judges don't aggressively lobby. But I'll say this, she was very clear in communicating her position with everyone concerned, and she was in the gallery on the night that the legislation was passed. And everyone knew it. When they said she's right up there. And she did a wonderful job. There was a crying need and a passionate issue this past time in reforming the juvenile justice system, a crying need in our state for reform there, because we had, the acronym CHIN stands for Children in Need of Supervision. We were at the dead last bottom in the nation on actually locking up juveniles who really shouldn't be locked up, who really hadn't violated the law, but for one reason or another, because of the discretion of the ruling judge, they may have been incarcerated, whether they were trying to teach them a lesson or whatever the grounds were. So we passed significant legislation that she put forth to reform that in the state to where that's no longer possible. So things like that she's done, and she's been very good as a spokesman for the court system and for reform. You know, this is about an interbranch cooperation, and she has led the charge on that. She came to me over a year ago, right, really first year after we were elected, and gave me the idea that she wanted the governor, herself, the speaker, and myself to meet quarterly to talk about the issues that are coming up each year in the session, the needs of the court, the things that she can do. And in the meantime, the speaker and I can also communicate, and the governor can communicate, and we do it in privacy. And it sort of set the groundwork for more cooperation. Now, you know, when we talked about a governor building relationships, or how a governor can build relationships and the conflicts that arise between a governor and the legislature, that was a topic earlier this morning also. It reminded me of when George Wallace had his own way of doing things back in the 60s and 70s, and back during his last years as governor, when Seth, you were just a young freshman House member, the way he would build relationships, he would call a new quadrennium would start, he would call in legislators into his office. He would have someone very influential like the highway director or the finance director, someone of importance, say the governor wants to see you, needs to talk to you. Escort him over to the governor's office, and Wallace would be sitting there in his office smoking a cigar, and he would have a huge map of the state of Alabama. And on that map, he had the highway director there, and he would have all of the proposed road projects outlined in red through every county in the state. And because in Alabama, the governor has very strong constitutional powers, and the highway department is under his dominion. And he would say, now, John or whoever, he would say, now, I've got my program that I need to get through the legislature this time. And here's a good program. It's good for Alabama. It's good for the people. And I know you've got these roads up here. There's 29, 32, and 40. I know you're trying to get those roads paved and those bridges built. And says, now, I'm going to do that for you, but I need for you to be for my program. So that was, now, I don't know if that was a relationship building, but he was sure communicating. He was sure communicating. So I guess maybe that's the American political patronage system at work. But as I said before, Chief Justice Cobb, on a serious note, has done a great job. We did accomplish quite a bit. We're going to continue. She brought us these ideas. Those meetings would not have happened without her leadership and without her bringing us together, and a lot of good things have happened and will continue to happen. So I just want to say thank you for letting me be here, and I'll pass it on to the Speaker.
Jim, thank you very much, and it is a pleasure to be here with you all this afternoon. Is this microphone on? Let me tell you, it's already been said a time or two here today that sometimes we're separated by a common language, and I'll tell you a quick but true story that would illustrate that point. We had some members of the Alabama House and Senate that went with the Alabama National Guard on a trip over to Europe to see the National Guard at work there. As you all know from all of our states now, the National Guard is very much an integral part of our nation's defense. And so the first stop was in Stuttgart, Germany, and they saw the great hospital that's there and looked at the work that was taking place there by our Air Force units. Went on from there to, after spending a day or so, to Brussels, Belgium, to see how the National Guard was interacting with NATO. Of course, it's stationed there and headquartered in Brussels. And after spending a couple of days there, they made their way on over to Oxford, England, to see the great 8th Air Force installation there and to be briefed on the mission of the Air Force and how the refueling tankers from Alabama were involved directly with the 8th Air Force. And after they got off in the afternoon, there were 3 members of our Alabama State Senate that walked outside the hotel, looked up and down the street to see if they could see a sign indicating a pub. They couldn't see one, and so they looked back and forth, and finally one of the guys said to the other 2, well, I'll go ask this lady on the corner here if she can give us some directions. So he walks over to this lady in Oxford, England, and says, excuse me, ma'am, do you speak English? To which she replied, a damn sight better than you. So we're all here about communication today. And I was thinking, as other presenters were talking earlier today, about this checks and balances and about intergovernmental cooperation, interbranch cooperation. You know, my background is in business, and it used just to worry the heck out of me that government was so inefficient. And I talked about all these, I thought about the checks and balances, how we pass a law in the legislature, finally get it through both the House and the Senate, and the governor could veto it. The the governor signed it into law. Well, if we overrode the governor's veto, the Supreme Court could later find it to be unconstitutional. And I thought, what a terrible way to do business. And after working in the system for a couple of years, I think I figured it out. You know, our founding fathers were very wise because they didn't want a whole lot of government. They wanted to protect people from government, so they wanted it to be difficult to change the law. And so as I tell groups in Alabama, you know, if you want efficient government, you want dictatorship. And I'd be pleased to have that form of government if I could be the dictator. Otherwise, I think all of us are very blessed to have this form of government, first from our founding fathers and then later emulated through the states. There's a lot of things that we can do when we do work together. Sometimes we forget there's a fourth branch of government. I remember, Dan, when we were asked in the Southern Legislative Conference about 10 years ago now to go over to England and to Scotland as guests of the British Foreign Office. A group of us that were selected from the South went over there and spent several good days. First in England, went to the Parliament there, and then later went up to the new Parliament in Scotland. And the purpose of this story involves our discussion with the Speaker of the House there in the new Parliament in Scotland, just after devolution. And his comments to us were, you know, our press here for decades insisted we have our own Parliament. But since we have one seated, they can't leave us alone. They complain about everything we do. And we said to him, welcome to the real world of politics. It happens not just in our states and in all of our states, but it also happens in other places in the world. And I say that to say this. Mary, when you were talking about what great things you've accomplished earlier in Washington State with your compensation commission, we tried that 10 years ago in Alabama. One of the first acts I took when I became Speaker. I said, this is we have a very foolish way of establishing compensation. We've got some people that are really expert in this area, and we need to turn it over to them. So let's establish a Citizens Compensation Commission to accomplish this result. We fashioned the legislation together, we passed it through the House, and you couldn't believe how the press jumped all over that issue then as it was proposed in the Senate. In the Senate, Jim, while you were not there, never took it up for consideration because of all of the criticism that they received in the press. And it was all about not having any backbone, trying to hide behind others to have your compensation increase. And so sometimes we forget we also have that fourth branch of government that we also have to work with, and that is the press. Well, I don't know about how you operate in your state, but in our state, we do try to find ways we can cooperate. I think Richard Allen, our very capable corrections commissioner, will agree with me that in terms of cooperation with particularly with the executive branch, with the legislative branch of government, that spirit of cooperation has really been helped by a process we call smart budgeting, which simply means writing objectives into the budget. I know a lot of people spend a lot of time writing objectives and then a lot of time preparing a budget. And if you don't have those two things coordinated, you're wasting a lot of time when you write your objectives. Because I can tell you what your objectives are is where you spend your money. And so if you're not doing that in your state, I would suggest two things will occur if you were to decide to do it. One is you'll find that you have a new means of cooperating, particularly, again, Judge, with the executive branch of government. And secondly, you'll find a more efficient way of using your scarce resource. And you will, in fact, be putting together those two elements, your objectives and your money. Now, Jim and Sue Bell are right about what's happened, I think, since our new Chief Justice has been elected. We've had better cooperation with the judicial branch than we've had, in my experience, and I've been there again 30 years in Alabama. But the idea of having quarterly luncheons with a pledge to each other that we won't discuss outside of those luncheons the topics that we bring up and talk about. And I can tell you now, after the fact, we spent a couple of those meetings talking about this juvenile justice reform measure that finally became law. And if you don't think in Alabama that we have a Chief Justice that's involved in legislation, you should have heard the conversation she had with me 2 years ago when we didn't pass it. I can tell you she felt very passionate about it, and I made sure this year that we made it a priority and that we got it in fact, through both the House and the Senate. But a lot of things that we could do, we probably wouldn't do, frankly, if we didn't need to become more efficient in the way we do business. Richard Allen proposed in a recent special session that we make a minor modification of the law that's going to save us millions of dollars every year, and that is to authorize our corrections commissioner to furlough people who are terminally ill. We're spending, and I bet if you'll check in your states, millions of dollars on prisoners that could be released to their own families to care for them in their last days. And you say, what difference does that make about cost? Well, your state government's paying 100% of the cost. All of these people will qualify for either Medicare, where the federal government pays 100%, or for Medicaid, where the federal government will pay 70% of their health care costs. So but would we have passed that if not faced with the overcrowded conditions of our prisons? Frankly, probably not. But sometimes you're able to do things politically when you decide you are in fact going to work together to find more efficient ways to do business. We in Alabama have been working for years now with a group that was formed by a previous Attorney General, a group called the Alabama Sentencing Commission. And we have members that are made up of people from the judiciary, people from the legislature, people from different advocacy groups that are looking after the interests of crime victims. And our purpose there is twofold. One, we want to get to a system in Alabama that's, in fact, where we have truth in sentencing, where we know if you're sentenced to a year in prison, you'll serve a year. We also, though, want to have a situation where we have guidelines for our judges to use in these various cases. And so far, those guidelines that have been developed by the Sentencing Commission are, in fact, voluntary. We'd like to get to the point where we have more stringent, I know some of you in the judiciary might not like to hear this, but to have more stringent guidelines about sentences that can be imposed, because again, if your state is like ours, we're way over capacity in our corrections department. Other things that we're doing in Alabama, again, we're doing frankly from the standpoint of necessity. The judge talked about having drug courts and having community corrections. Those things for the nonviolent offender are important elements of our justice system. And we need to implement those, again, because they get a better result, they protect the public, and they cost a lot less money. So there are things that we can do if we'll decide to put aside our differences and work together. And the last thing I'll mention, and the next thing that we're going to work on together in Alabama, is coming up with a reform of our indigent defense program. The Chief Justice touched on this earlier. Our population is 4.6 million. We spent last year about $66 million on indigent defense. Now, I don't know whether that's the right amount of money to spend or not, but I can tell you for those people that cannot afford to have their own attorney, they have the right to be represented as well as those that can't afford to have their own attorney. We all know that just as a matter of fact. But beyond that, we're not sure we have in Alabama a system where we have fair justice across the board. Some places we have a great system of indigent defense, others we do not. We want to make sure it's uniform. If we can save some money, we'd like to do that. We want to make sure that our program that we have in place, in fact, is fair to our people. And the way we're going to accomplish that result is by working with our Commissioner of Corrections, with members of the legislature, with our judiciary, and with advocacy groups that understand both sides of this proposition. So we're glad to be here with you in North Dakota. It's my first trip here. What a beautiful state, what great people you have. And I want to tell you that I didn't know what to expect, but this is really beyond my expectations. So thanks for having us here. Richard Allen.
You know, it's not so important to bat cleanup when you had the first three batters hit home runs. So I guess I'll just have to kind of clean up the pieces here. First, I want to bring you greetings from Governor Riley and regrets. He wanted to be here, but his scheduling conflicts just would not allow it. But he asked me to give you his regrets. The governor has recognized the value of joint interbranch cooperation for years and has benefited from the consultations that they've described, the quarterly meetings and things like that, in addition to the one-on-one meetings they have. And I asked him to give me some examples of things that he benefited. And he says, well, we've got the Vegas rule. You know, what we do in those meetings stays in those meetings. I can't tell you anything. So Seth breached a confidence when he talking about juvenile justice, but the governor wouldn't tell me anything. He said, well, he said, I heard things that maybe changed the way I did things and got things done, and that helped me and the state. So I know they've been valuable. I know he's got some good out of it, and he looks forward to continue to work with these three leaders of the state for the good of the state. Now, you might wonder, why in the world would the governor send a prison commissioner to represent him at a conference like this? His dire old prison commissioner. He's got many more articulate cabinet members and staff members that he could have sent, but for some reason he chose me. And I think the reason he chose me is because, you know, it's come up several times in other people's discussions and discussions up here about the problems with the prison systems in the country, not just in Alabama, but every state. We all have basically the same problems. And I think these problems lend themselves and really cry out for interbranch cooperation in order to attack some of these problems. We may not can stop the growth in prison, but we maybe can manage the overcrowding of our prisons a little bit by interbranch cooperation. And that's what I'm going to talk about in my time this afternoon. The first thing to do is the background, kind of set describe the problem. And the problem in Alabama is the same as the problem in your state, and that is the explosive growth in our prison population since the 80s has just been unchecked. In Alabama, we had fewer than 5,000 inmates in the early 80s and had a budget of about $40 million. We now have 25,000 inmates behind the wire, and our budget is $400 million. We have within our prisons the state's principal drug treatment program, not in mental health, but in the prisons. Our prisons have become a default mental health facility. A speaker this morning mentioned the fact, I think it's Professor, last name, Bow, okay, mentioned this morning the grand experiment of deinstitutionalizing the mentally ill that started in the early 80s. Well, it worked very well. They went from institutions to community care facilities, which didn't work like they were advertised, and so they're in prison now. I have over 5,000 inmates that receive mental health treatment in the prisons, which is the worst place in the world to give people mental health treatment. But the growth in our physical plant and the growth of our staff has not kept pace with the growth of the prison population and the challenges that those prisoners bring in with them. Our prisons right now are at about 180% of their design capacity. 180%, let that sink in a little bit. We have 180% of the prisoners that we were designed to hold. Well, how do you do that? Well, you just cram them in, you know. You take warehouses and convert them into bed space and double bunk them and put them as close together. You take canning factories, you take gymnasiums, you take day rooms that were, you know, where you have cell blocks and you put beds in those, and anything you can think of that will hold a prisoner, you stick them in there, and they're unair conditioned and they're crowded and they're just you know, I thank my stars every day we have not had a major incident in our prisons, because under those conditions you would think that even an inmate's endurance would snap at some point in time. So every day I'm just thankful we don't have that type of situation arise. The funding in our state has not kept pace. The Pew study that came out a few months ago, the headline was 1 in every 100 Americans is in prison or jail someplace. What didn't get headlines was a chart showing the expenditures as a percentage of state budget for the prison systems. And Alabama was 49th. Only 49 states responded, but we were 49th. We spend 2.6% of our state budget on corrections in Alabama. The national average was 6.8%. So if we doubled our expenditure for prisons, we still wouldn't meet the national average. And so that's why we are in such a situation we're in. We've been in and out of federal courts since the 80s. We were under a federal receivership at one time. We've had a long-running litigation between the sheriffs and the county commissioners and my department, because when we can't take prisoners in our prisons because they're overcrowded, they back up in the county jails, and they have to pay the freight, and they don't like that. It costs them millions of dollars a year for them to house state prisoners. Even before I officially became commissioner, a couple of days before my appointment was effective, there was a hearing on this litigation in a circuit court in Montgomery County. And I went down there anyway, even though I wasn't officially the commissioner, to tell the judge that we had a plan, we were going to do some things, but he had to give us a little breathing room. And I made an argument that I said, Judge, my job is to secure these people, incarcerate them in a constitutional environment, hopefully rehabilitate them, but I don't have any control over how many come in, when they come in, and when they go out. And I said, we've got indispensable parties that are missing from this litigation. The DAs and the judges need to be represented here because they control how many come in, when they come in, and how long they're going to stay. I said the Board of Pardons pros need to be in here because they can let them out, but I can't. You need to get them in this litigation. And I said you need to invite our friends from the legislature here also because they're the ones that provide the money that would let us expand or operate more efficiently, what have you. And you need to get those parties before your court too so we can really have the problem, people that can fix the problem. I can't fix it. Well, he was not impressed. I thought it was a great argument. And he was threatening to put me in jail, put me in his jail, because I couldn't get the state prisons out of the county jails around the state. They're going to put me in jail for contempt. Well, what are the solutions to the overcrowding problem of our prisons? Well, the easy solution is to build more prisons. That's very simple. Just create more prisons. And some states have tried that for years. Texas and California, for example, have had massive expansion programs over the years. And guess what? They've reached a point where they say, no more. We can't continue to build prisons. We've got to find some alternative ways of handling this problem. And so that's where the opportunities for interbranch cooperation come in. What are the ways that we can address this problem without just sending everybody to prison? Sentencing reform has been mentioned. Sentencing reform was on the agenda of the Sentencing Commission that Speaker Hammett mentioned for years. The governor had a task force a couple of years ago that studied overcrowding. One of the recommendations was pass sentencing reform. And so he made it one of his priorities in a couple of sessions back. And when he did, the legislature and the governor got together and they got it passed, something the Sentencing Commission had not been able to do for years. But he got it done, and it established these initial guidelines that the Speaker mentioned, that is voluntary guidelines. But it's estimated if the DAs and judges will use those voluntary guidelines, in 75% of the cases, it'll reduce my bed requirements by 1,000 beds the first year, 2,000 the second year, and 3,000 beds by the fifth year. So it's a tool that could really work. Community corrections also. We've had community corrections in Alabama since the early 90s, but it has not proved effective for various reasons. Well, in 2000, Judge Cobb mentioned there was an election, and she was in that election for Chief Justice. She had a very tough race against a hand-picked opponent that the governor had appointed to be Chief Justice before, well-financed from Birmingham, where all the money is in Alabama. And she went around the state singing "This Little Heart of Mine, I'm going to let it shine," and beat him like a drum. So shortly after the election, I asked the governor, I said, I need to talk to the Chief Justice. I need help. I need help with some things I'm trying to do in the prison system. And he said, go see her. He had no problem. The election was over. It's time to start working together to get these things done. So I went to see a judge, and she was just in the middle of transition. She wasn't in office yet, but she was in all this. As you know, if you transition in office, it's very hectic. And I said, I need help. We've passed sentencing reform, but we're getting resistance from the DAs, and the judges aren't embracing it. We need to get the judges and DAs on board, and I need you to help me with use the moral suasion of your office to get that done. And I said, also, we've got community corrections in some counties, but many counties don't have it. I need you helping expanding community corrections. She said, well, I've got a deal for you. We need to get juvenile justice passed also, and we need to get drug courts going also, and let's work together on these things. And I said, that's great. We prepared a letter for her to sign, to send out to all the DAs and judges saying, you need to comply with the sentencing guidelines, you need to get your community corrections going, and we're going to be establishing juvenile drug courts in every county of the state. But she went further than that. When these judges would come to tell her their woes about, I need more money for clerks, I need another judge in this county, she said, the first question was, are you implementing the guidelines? Second question was, do you have a community corrections program? And don't come and talk to me about what you need until you get those programs up and going. When she makes her budget presentation to the legislature the first time, you won't believe it, but she said, attacking and reducing prison overcrowding is one of my responsibilities as Chief Justice. So she has made the commitment as Chief Justice of the court system that the courts are going to be involved in this problem, and not just the executive branch and the prison commissioner. So it's just incredible what she has taken on. And in fact, we have increased the community corrections output. We were diverting 90 souls a month 2 years ago. We got up to 110 last year. We'll probably be 150 this year. And I think it's because the moral suasion she used with her judges and the DAs around the state, who are still a little bit resistant but are coming around. Sentencing reform, the numbers aren't in yet on that, but we know that we're getting better participation on the sentencing guidelines around the state. And I think it's primarily because she put her office behind it. The drug court program is strictly her, it's there because of her insistence. We had about 16 or 17 counties that had drug courts when she became Chief Justice. We now have, 40-something have programs, and every county but one in the state who has a DA that just won't listen to reason has got a program in the making. So within a year or so, we will have them in all 66 of the 67 counties, and we've got to do something about that one DA. But it's because she said we're going to do it, and she went to the governor and got money. She went to the legislature and got more money. They cooperated, and it's a reality because she said we need to do it. I could go on and on about the things that we're working on together. But the point is that by working together, you can get results. And by realizing, somebody this morning mentioned the fact that the judges don't seem to have any interest in well, she's made it a part of her campaign. When she talks to civic groups, she talks about prison reform and prison overcrowding and all these types of things. And it's making things happen, it's making a difference in our state. And maybe the most important part is, I'm not in jail right now, and there's no threats at this point in time. Thank you very much, Justice Cobb. And I think I'll turn it over.
It's so encouraging to hear about such interbranch cooperation in Alabama. We appreciate what you're doing there and what you've shared with us. And this point that was made about being separated by a common language, you know, I heard Chief Justice Cobb say y'all a lot, and I have a brother that lives in Texas, and he uses that term too. He was raised in North Dakota, so I don't quite understand it. But I asked him one time, I said, no, you say y'all, and I mean, I looked around, it was only me. What do you say y'all for? He said, well, you have to understand, y'all is singular, all y'all is plural, so I'm learning. We have a microphone again in the same spot in the room, and would encourage your questions, comments, and we need to have some good discussion on all these great points that have been raised.
Like
Senator
I'm
Kelly.
very impressed to hear of all the cooperation that's going on in this issue, and I think it's very important to the whole nation. And one thing I'd just like to add is a small town lawyer who's watched this problem happen and become a policymaker to try to deal with it. Is what I've seen is a problem is sentencing is something we have to address, but generally good judges and good prosecutors can deal with sentencing anomalies by dropping charges or making charges. The big problem to me is that it's not a problem we're trying to fix, but one we're trying to manage. And in Kentucky, we know that there's a better way to manage this. In Kentucky, when we look at our population, very similar to yours. Our state population is the same, our prison population is about the same. I asked the Commissioner of Corrections to inventory this population and tell me who are they. And he came back and said, look, we have a population we call the 85%ers that through a federal initiative some years back encouraged all the states to require them to serve 85% of their sentence. I'm sure you have that in Alabama. And these are your murderers, your rapists, your arsonists, sexual predators, really bad people. And he said the number of our 24,000 people incarcerated, 50-85% is 1,300. We could put them all in one facility. So we've just got a big population of basically what I call addicted offenders. And the problem that I've seen as a small town defense lawyer is you go in and the judges and the prosecutors say, look, we understand you're addicted, we want to help you. So I'm going to give you a big probated sentence. So if you're really encouraged, I'm going to do 21 days of treatment, don't come back. And everybody knows that that person's coming back. And then the judges are going to be, say, well, we really tried to help you, and we'll give you one more chance now. Now we'll give you a second sentence, we'll run concurrent, and don't come back. Well, they're coming back. Then there are multiple offenders, and they're warehoused for 10 years, and anybody originally would have just said, go to jail for a year or something. emerging population. And it's very clear that we can have a policy of diversion, alternative sentencing, where you require long-term intensive treatment, supervision, require them to work, which is not softening crime, much smarter crime. But the problem is judges and prosecutors have to be prepared for these people to fail and then process them back through the system. With minimum periods of incarceration, that's, to say what you did is wrong, go spend another week in jail or, some period of time that punishes them, but they come back into treatment, back to work, under supervision, and eventually they'll tire of the system and they'll get a little older and we'll get them out. So you manage that population much less cost, much less social cost, and more humane. I think everybody the nation is looking at that, trying to figure that how to do that. I'm very impressed by the intellect and cooperation that's going on in Alabama. I just want to share this also.
Comments, please do.
You made a comment about drug courts. About drug courts, I think we can until we have the funding for judicial education. So things really go hand in hand. But model drug courts are the single best methodology to deal with the drug-addicted offender. And what we're doing in Alabama, and because of the support, interbranch support, is the replication of model drug courts. And it literally is changing the attitude of the judge to basically understand, and the district attorney, because it's a team effort, is to understand that I would easily say 80% of our people in prison, and it's probably higher, are there because of drugs or alcohol. And they committed a number of nonviolent offenses before they got there. So we will make the public safer in Alabama because our replication of model drug courts throughout the state. But it takes a lot more investment of judicial time and resources. And so consequently, it really was a matter of really working with the judges to help them see that drug courts, even though it takes much more, they may see a drug court offender 150 times as compared to 3 times. They're drug tested, 10 to 12 times a month as compared to 1 time a month. They see a case manager 8 to 10 times, a drug court case manager 8 to 10 times a month, as opposed to a probation officer once a month. You just simply get better results from drug court. And the judges that have gotten involved to understand that they must give appropriate sanctions, because they go into court better understanding now to expect failure. And Dan, isn't that what you're talking about? Is that with an addict, you should expect them to fail because they're addicted. It's to expect the failure and then give the appropriate consequence. And now our big challenge in Alabama is going to be trying to find the resources to increase our capacity on long-term, low-cost, quality drug treatment. Because at some point, you obviously drug treatment, and it should be long-term because it takes that long for the brain to change and to repair is going to be our big challenge. And I want to promise our members, Commissioner Allen and Governor Folsom and Speaker Hammett, that I now want to begin the next phase of basically quality assurance. And that is that I want the money to basically have a drug court liaison that will literally go from drug court to drug court to drug court to drug court in all our 67 counties and make sure that we have fidelity to model and make sure that we really are doing it the way that we do. And when we do, what we found is that the judges come back and tell us that nothing means more to them in their entire experience of being a judge than being involved in drug court. That it makes them a better father and a better husband because they're in drug court. And so it's because of that interbranch cooperation that we've been able to do that.
And as soon as she gets that fixed, I'm going to ask her to start mental health courts the same way, because we need to get those mentally ill folks out of prison and back into the community also. So you got your next project waiting for you, Judge.
Senator Higgins, tell us who you are. We don't all know.
I'm Linda Higgins, State Senator representing Minneapolis, and I'm the Chair of the Public Safety and Budget Division. This year, Minnesota became the 2nd state in the nation to work on the issue of veterans and active duty who are coming back from war with mental health issues, post-traumatic stress disorder, and then getting in trouble with the law. And we followed the lead of California this year and set it up so that our judges now are required to ask, are you a veteran? Are you active duty during the sentencing phase of the trial? And if so, we asked that the judges get the person into treatment at the VA and other places where there will be help to deal with that. And then taking that PTSD or whatever mental health issue into account in the sentencing phase. And this is something that the court administrator came and worked with us when we were in small. He was trying to put the whole issue together. Gave us some information on kind of the practical nuts and bolts parts of it that weren't working the way we originally structured it. I had a chance to talk to the governor and warn him that we were working on this so that he didn't get broadsided with one of those soft on crime kind of things when it got to his desk. So all of you who are worried about what's going on with the vets who are coming home, that might be something that you'd be interested in at other stages.
Very good. Any comments? All right, I have another one coming here.
Good afternoon, I'm Sal Love. I'm the North Dakota State Court Administrator, and I always consider part of my charge is looking at everything from the public side. And one of the things I like the interbranch discussions. One of the things that really is not sitting well with me or questioning is the privacy. And I'm wondering, how do you stop that from looking like collusion? And if the press comes and they say, what are y'all talking about? You have to listen to my southerners. What are you talking about? Why can't you discuss it? And then to hear you come to a place like this and say, well, we worked out some of the details around the table when no one else was there. Have there been accusations of collusion and how do you get around it?
Sure.
Let me address that in this way. We have a very stringent open meetings law in our state, which we all do our very best to abide by. But our open meetings law requires us to have open meetings with bodies that have authority to make decisions. And when we have discussions between the various branches of government, we can't decide anything. We can decide what we're going to work together to try to accomplish, and so we don't consider that to be an open meeting. And we've had no accusation, by the way, of collusion.
Good questions. Others? One quick comment in North Dakota.
Can I just say, other than that, we actually have the press that have inquired because they want to brag on us for getting together. I mean, I've actually had the press contact to say, we'd like to run, an article because we are, they understand that it takes communication amongst the branches to solve these big problems. And so actually there's been, praise, and we expect more of it. Now, that doesn't mean that there might not be some criticism, but I guess that's one of the things that we're less concerned about as opposed to trying to craft solutions.
Well, since you've said something, I guess following up on what they said, there has been no controversy. The press in the state is well aware that we've had these meetings, and like Sue said, they've really been complimentary, I think, more than anything. The reasons it's important, once you sit down and you find some common ground among representatives of the Senate, the House, the Judiciary, and the Chief Administrative Officer of the state, the Executive Officer of the state. I'll give you an example. When we met about 8 or 10 months ago and we talked about the reforms the Chief Justice wanted to present to the legislature, and we all found we were in agreement on those concepts and those ideas. Maybe we hadn't worked out all the details yet. A lot of things took place, amendments and other things in the legislature. But after it was all said and done, and once the legislation had passed, there were, and I won't name any names, but there were a few judges who took exception with these ideas. The vast majority of judges supported their ideas. And they were friends of the governor, same party, and they went to him and prevailed upon him to veto the legislation. And he said no, that he couldn't do that, that he thought it was good legislation, that he understood it, and we discussed it several months ago and said he was in agreement. So, you know, if there had not been that communication and that prior agreement on those broad concepts, something could have happened the other way. But as an authority, the four of us really aren't designated as any kind of authority to make decisions. If we were an authority voting on, we made up the majority of an authority voting on a bond issue or any other kind of legal action, and you could say we violate the Sunshine Law, but these are just, we basically just have informal discussions on concepts. So, but that's a good question, and we always need to be mindful of the public's interest.
That is a good question, Sally. And in my history, I was a journalist for a number of years, so I respect the open meeting laws and so on. One of the things that I think has been pointed out is with open meeting laws, you can never avoid the fact that at some point you're going to have a conversation somewhere with someone about something, and you can't call a public meeting or press conference every time that occurs. A good example is, you know, I might walk over to a colleague's desk in the legislature and chat with them about what would you think about a bill that did such and such. Now, that's not a public meeting because the two of us, again, can't do anything. So I think they've described it fairly well. I think we have another question. Dan.
Actually, Mr. Chairman, it's more of a common question. And let me thank...
What was your name again? You didn't introduce yourself.
Dan Strait, the music, the CSG, and thank you all from North Dakota for providing such a great leader for us this year. What we've seen at CSG, we do something called Trends in America. You can see it outside. It's what are the driving forces that are changing our society. And what we know is that we've organized our government both by branches, but by specialized departments, health, corrections, education, transportation. But you take, and we inherited that system from the Europeans, but when you take that system and you put immigration and aging and globalization, these cross-cutting changes of forces, you find out that many times when you're trying to solve problems, you can't do it in your vertical silos. So it's not only true across the executive branch agencies, and I would imagine Speaker Hammett and that, you know, legislative committees are finding more and more overlap as you try to solve problems. You've got to have communication across these resource bases. And the greatest thing that's going on in university lives today is interdisciplinary studies. Teach people how to work in a matrix form. And that's exactly really what you're describing for me. I just wanted to say that we have a whole new thrust at CSG looking at governance transformation initiatives, looking at successful outcomes, how you budget and legislate for outcomes, how you work across branches, across your state borders. These are issues of the new 21st century form of governance that we've got to move to, and we've had a case study here. And I just tell you that I've known 3 of these people up here, other than the commissioner, who's obviously a highly qualified and very experienced person. You watch Alabama. Alabama is on the move among states. And they'd be the first to tell you they started with some pretty low indicators, looking at the 40, the 50 states, but they are on the move, and it's because of the leadership that's sitting up there that's happening.
Hear, hear. Thank you, Dan. That's true. Please.
Thanks.
Is your microphone on, sir? Would you check the lever there just to see?
Hello.
That's better. Thank you.
I just wanted to comment that this morning, as soon as you said this is being taped, I think a lot of us just kind of... But I wanted to say that I agree with Chief Justice Cobb that the drug courts are really doing well. In Hawaii, we have them all at every court level. Adult, criminal, juvenile, family, and so forth. But we also have a new program called HOPE, Hawaii Opportunity Probation Enforcement. And this program deals with swift punishment and constant monitoring. And the University of Pepperdine and UCLA have put together a evaluation committee, and they are now evaluating the program. And we understand initially, the initial stats kept by the Attorney General has indicated that these people with drug problems have made their appointments have increased by 60-some%, and dirty testing has been reduced by some 80%. Now, we all know that in many of our jurisdictions, it takes sometimes years to get a person brought into court on a probation violation. This program, as soon as the probation officer tests a person and it's dirty, can be detected in the morning, in the afternoon he's in court, and by sundown he's in jail for a couple days, perhaps a week. But that has shown to be a very good deterrent. And Wall Street Journal just sent his name is Scholes, he's a Pulitzer Prize winner on the stand, and he is doing a story on hope. So hopefully many of you will look into it and find it productive as well.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Chief Justice. Appreciate that. Any other quick questions or comments? Don't be bashful. As we go forward, you'll always have an opportunity to do this, and we think it's important for the interaction. I would be remiss if I didn't add to the comments that have already been made to really compliment our panel from Alabama, our guests who traveled very far to get here, and we understand that. We appreciate it deeply. And I know that at least Chief Justice Cobb got here early enough to see a little bit of our state, a little bit of the western part of our state, the beautiful North Dakota Badlands, she said, and they were very impressed. So we are pleased that they're here and hope you can stick around for a while.